Welcome to the Word Walk, where we explore timeless truths of the Bible, one book at a time. I'm your host, Ty, and today we're diving into the very first book of the Bible. Yeah, that is the book of Genesis. From creation of the world to the story of Joseph, Genesis sets the foundation for everything that's to come in the Bible. So grab your Bible and let's get started. It's the Word Walk. Okay, Genesis, opening the Bible chronicles beginnings. Its 50 chapters fall into two parts, which are Primal history, chapters 1 to 11, and Patriarchal history, chapters 12 to 50. This book lays foundations for understanding the creation of the universe, human nature, sin, and God's redemptive plan. It recounts pivotal events like the world's formation, humanity's fall, a catastrophic flood, and the origins of nations and languages. Genesis then narrows its focus to Abraham and his descendants, tracing God's covenant with them and their journeys. These ancient narratives continue to offer insights into faith, morality, and the human condition, resonating with readers of the Bible across millennia. Let's go. Okay, let's start off with the main themes of Genesis. My list here has 4 main themes. Some will have different themes, but we're going with 4 right now. First one is going to be creation. Genesis begins with the creation story in chapters 1 and 2. Here we see the power and creativity of God as He brings the universe itself into existence. This is all God's work. Nothing we have, nothing would exist without His will to create. Then we're going to roll into the fall of man, which is featured in chapter 3. Adam and Eve's disobedience introduced sin and consequences into the world. This sets the stage for the rest of the biblical narrative, which is about God's plan to redeem humanity. Side note, you've probably heard many times that sin has been brought into the world because Eve ate the apple. If you read the text in your translation, you will see that apple was never mentioned. It was called a fruit. Random tip. So next, we're going to go into the other theme of covenant. Genesis introduces the concept of covenant. It's a central theme throughout the Bible. God makes covenants with Noah in Genesis chapter 9 and Abraham throughout Genesis chapters 12, 15, and 17, promising blessings and establishing a relationship with His people. Last on the list is patriarchs. The lives of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, are chronicled in Genesis. Their stories demonstrate faith, obedience, and God's faithfulness to His promises. You know, speaking of promises, God always keeps His promises. That's actually a good idea for another episode. You know, here are some examples of promises. God kept His promise to Noah. He kept His promise to the land of Israel. He also kept the promise of a Messiah. He kept a promise of the Holy Spirit. He has kept a promise of eternal life. Those are 5. We're going to go into later on the promises that, not the promises, but the promise that God made to Abraham as well, later on this episode. But now, I think it's a good idea for another episode, going into depth about the bunch of promises that God made and kept in the Bible. Let's move on. Here's a fun fact. I'm recording this at 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know why, but I get fairly productive after midnight. Anyway, let's shift into key verses and why they are significant. Let's start off with the first verse in the first chapter. Yeah, that's right. Here it goes. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That's it. That is God allowing us to exist, creating the universe, or if you're a nerd, a multiverse. It all starts right there. This verse is not just an opening statement, but consider it a declaration of God's supreme authority and sovereignty. By stating that God created everything, it emphasizes his power, wisdom, and intentionality. Before anything else existed, there was God. God is eternal and self-sufficient. This truth that we read lays a foundation for our understanding of the world and our place in it. It reminds us that creation is a deliberate act of love by God, not a mistake, not just randomness. One of the phrases that I've heard from theologians and evangelists is the uncaused cause. God just is. Also, by God making everything, that means everything is inherently good and purposeful. As believers, this verse should encourage us to see God's hand in every single aspect of life and to trust his perfect design. Next, let's go over to chapter 3, verse 15. I'm going to tell you the term for this. It's one of my favorites, but let's get to the verse itself. Genesis 3:15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. I've read that before, of course, but I never really knew the term. I learned about it in a Bible class that a pastor at my church. My church has lots of pastors, and one of my favorites is Pastor Bobby. I don't know if he will ever hear this, but he explained it was known as the proto-evangelium, or the first gospel. It's a big word. It's actually a lot easier to say than sometimes you think. Anyway, so like I said, it's known as the proto-evangelium, or the first gospel. This verse gives us the first glimpse of God's redemptive plan. In the aftermath of the fall, the whole Adam and Eve eating the fruit thing. In the aftermath of that, when sin and death entered the world, God promised a future savior. This verse that we just read, Genesis 3:15, this verse foretells the coming of Jesus Christ, who will defeat Satan and redeem humanity. The imagery of the serpent striking the heel and the offspring crushing the head symbolizes Christ's suffering and ultimate victory over evil. For us, this verse is a beacon of hope, showing that even in our darkest moments, and we have our darkest moments, don't we? God has a plan for salvation and restoration of us. Always remember there's hope. Always. Next one, we're going to jump over to Genesis 12. Genesis 12 verses 2 and 3 goes like this. This is God to Abraham. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. That is God's covenant to Abraham, and it is a cornerstone of our faith. The verse highlights God's promise to Abraham, which has implications for all of humanity. See, through Abraham's lineage, God would bring forth a great nation. That nation would become called Israel, and also, ultimately, Jesus Christ. This covenant shows God's grace and faithfulness, promises beginnings, not just for Abraham, but for all nations. It reassures us of God's unwavering commitment to his promises. Like I said before, if God makes a promise, it's going to be kept one way or another. It may not come when you want it to come, but it will come. So as I was saying, it reassures us of God's unwavering commitment to his promises and his plan to bless the world through Jesus Christ. Now, as Christians, we are part of this promise. We're called to be a blessing to others. We're also called to share the good news of Christ's salvation, which, is all throughout the Bible. And lastly, again, there's lots, but I'm trying to not go into tangents. I'm trying to respect your time. So we're keeping things a bit short. Last one we're going to go with is Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. Hear how it goes. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. That's Joseph, right? That is Joseph's declaration. It's a powerful testament to God's providence. Like, despite his brother's betrayal and the hardships he faced, that's what Joseph did. Joseph recognized God's hand in his journey. This verse reveals that God can turn the most harmful actions that you can imagine into something good for his purposes. Off the script for a second. That's right. Somehow getting in a car accident and hurting your leg, for example. God can take that pain and suffering that you got due to that car accident and turn into something good. Let's say you hurt your leg, you were out of work for 6 months. I'm just going random here. What if in that 6 month time you're stuck home or out of work, you learn a new skill, which gets you a new job after the fact that allows you to make more money? I ain't going into that prosperity gospel stuff. I'm just saying here, more money, meet your future wife, future kid, have kids, go on to many glorious things. That could be an example of God taking something negative and turning into something that as good as happened to you. So, like I said, God is always working for our good and his glory, of course. In our own lives, we can find comfort in knowing that no matter what trials we face, God can use them to fulfill his greater plan. It may never seem like that. My mom always would say, she got him someone else. God works in mysterious plans. We don't know what his plan is, but we can rest assured that his greater plan is a good one. So let's wrap that up. Joseph's story encourages us to trust God. He encourages us to trust God's timing in things. And also to trust again. Trust is a big thing. Faith is a big thing. Also, he encourages us to trust God's ability to bring good from any situation. I'll give you one more example of trusting. Those of you that know me personally know that I had a heart transplant. I was lying in the hospital for a couple months waiting for a transplant, hurting, suffering, miserable, not knowing if I was going to live or die. But God turned it around. I got that call for that transplant. 7 years later, I'm still here. I'm talking to you. You have to trust in his plan. Always. We'll go into that later on in other episodes. That's not what the subject is today. So, in closing this section, these key verses from Genesis are not just historical markers from a history book, but they are profound truths that shape what we believe in. They reveal God's character. They reveal his love for us and his eternal plan for redemption. Maybe you want to meditate on these scriptures. And if you meditate on these scriptures, be reminded of God's sovereignty, his promises, and unwavering grace. Next up, some important stories in Genesis. Okay, let's get into important stories in the Bible. I'm gonna go with how many I have in my notes here. I'm gonna go into six stories within Genesis. First one is going to be, of course, we got to go back to creation itself, right? Talked about it a bit in the previous segment. Let's go back to it real quick. Number one, creation and the Garden of Eden. The creation account is more than just a story about how the world or the universe began. It's, again, I'm retreading this, but it's important to get this in. It's a declaration of God's sovereignty and creativity. The systematic purpose and manner in which God creates light, sky, land, sea, plants, animals, humans, basically everything. It demonstrates, one of my favorite things is the omnis. Omnipresent, omniscience, omniscient. In this case, we're talking about omnipotence. It all of that demonstrates his omnipotence, got that word out. Omnipotence and wisdom. Humanity has been created in God's image, and we were given dominion over the earth, our home. Side note for my notes here, I'm getting up there in age, so I keep notes about what I'm going to talk about. I can't just fly off the handle, but I'm about to. Like I said, God gave us dominion over the earth, our home, besides heaven, if we get there. This is our only home that we got. Guess what? That means you kind of need to take care of it. So, right now, we're seeing examples of the consequences in some ways of our actions. It's my favorite saying. There are consequences to our actions, and boy, do I know it. Climate change is partially because of our not taking care of our home. When you litter in the streets, you're not taking care of your home. When you waste, you're not taking care of your home. Not supporting things to help the planet stay healthy is not taking care of our home. It's a failure of taking care of what God gave us from day one. I go on to tangents, so we're moving on. So, God gave us dominion over the earth, and that also signifies a special relationship with God. The Garden of Eden represents an ideal state of harmony between God, humans, us, and nature. The fall, the tragic fall of Adam and Eve, introduces sin, alienation, and death into the world. This event explains the human condition and the need for salvation, and sets the stage for God's redemptive plan through Jesus Christ, like I said before. Side note, I know you've done it. We've all been there. I'm still there sometimes. Something bad happens. You get sick. Someone you know got sick. Or you're an atheist, like I used to be. I admit it. And you cry out to God, or you ask God, or you get mad at God, and you're like, why did this have to happen to me? Why must I suffer? The answer is in Genesis chapter 1. Can I be blunt with you? And it kind of sucks, right? We suffer, we die, we get sick, all these negative things because sin has been introduced into the world. It's not an answer we like. It's not the answer we would definitely want to hear. But that's just the way it goes. But remember, it's all temporary, because God has a plan to fix that. That plan comes through His Son, Jesus Christ. So all the suffering that you go through, it'll end at some point. And it will be glorious once it ends. All right, next. Noah's Ark in Genesis chapters 6 to 7. So, the account of Noah and the ark, it basically illustrates God's judgment on the wicked, on a wicked world indeed, through the flood. You know, the entire earth, depending on what you believe, just that location maybe, got flooded. So, again, God's judgment on the wicked through the world, through the flood, but it also shows His mercy. How? And preserving Noah and his family. Noah's obedience in building the ark and gathering the animals. Also, it demonstrates for us faith in action. My man built this ark, got all the animals based on what God told him to do. That's faith. However, he got the message. He had enough faith to believe it, get it done, and we're here because of it. The flood serves as a dramatic reminder of God's holiness. Also, importantly, God is something God does not like. That's sin. So it's a reminder of His holiness, also His seriousness towards sin. Also, the preservation of Noah's family signifies God's mercy as well. Remember, He loves us. We do wicked things that he does not like, but he loves us and he will forgive. Lastly, let's see. So, like I said, it signifies God's mercy and his commitment to preserving a remnant for a fresh start. We got a fresh start because of that flood. May not look like we deserve that fresh start these days, but we got a fresh start. We got a second chance. Let's not waste that second chance. Also, this might ruffle little feathers real quick. You'll notice in the story of Noah's Ark, the rainbow. The rainbow is not just a flag for the LGBT community. The rainbow covenant reassures humanity of God's promise to never destroy the earth by flood again. It symbolizes hope and renewal. How you may feel about the rainbow these days, that's up to you. The most important thing is, that's God's symbol and a reminder for us. That's what the rainbow is. Number 3, Tower of Babel, located in Genesis 11. The Tower of Babel addresses humans. It addresses our pride and the quest for self-sufficiency. It features the people getting arrogant, cocky, and thinking they could reach God. What do? They attempted to build a tower to reach the heavens. You could say that reflected their desire to make a name for themselves and achieve unity apart from God, possibly. However, God, I'm not speaking for God, but I like to put my own little spin on this. God saw this. He's like, you thought. God intervened by confusing their languages and scattering them across the earth. And that also was an example of showing his humanity over human affairs. Also, the futility of human efforts to define his will. You could also say it was an example of us trying to be like God when we can't. Can't happen, never will happen. And the story, God is God. Lastly, this event explains the origin. It basically explains why we have different languages across the world and different cultures. And it also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pride and disobedience. That's it. That is, again, that's in Genesis chapter 11. Okay, here's the fun part. My notes for this are pretty big. The life of Abraham, the basically founder of Judaism, Christianity, and even Islam reveres him. Ain't going into that. Life of Abraham is covered through Genesis chapters 12 to 25. Let's get this going. Abraham's journey of faith is a cornerstone of our theology. God's call to Abraham to leave his homeland and to go to a land where things would start. He shows him the marks of the beginning of a covenant relationship based on faith and obedience. This covenant includes promises of land, descendants, blessings that extend to all nations till now. Abraham's encounters with God includes a covenant ceremony in Genesis chapter 15, the sign of circumcision, snippy snip, in Genesis 17. and reveals a deepening relationship that is marked by trust and commitment. We're going to go into that trust thing real quick. The account of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac in Genesis 22 is a profound test of faith and obedience. Let's go into that deeper. I love this part. When you read the Bible many times over, you always pick up something new. So, chapter 22 of Genesis is one of those things. How's it go? In Genesis 22, God commands Abraham to offer his son Isaac as a sacrifice. This request is crazy, right? Because, like I said, it's his only son, and God's like, all right, I need you to go over there and sacrifice your boy. Keep in mind that Isaac was not like a child. He was a grown-ish man, teenager probably. So, this request was challenging, as Isaac may have been a child or a teenager, like I said. God made a promise about Isaac and said that Abraham's descendant would be coming through him. But Abraham was obedient, immediately obedient. He didn't question it, really. And his obedience to that command revealed his faith and trust in the God. His statement to his servants in verse 5 of Genesis 22 is something to note. He says, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." Let me repeat that last part. And come again to you. That, to me, everything I say is just my opinion. People will disagree. I'm not a pastor. I'm just a normal dude telling you how I feel. All of that seems to indicate to me that he knew that he and Isaac would return, that God would provide the true sacrifice. Let's go into some questions I wrote about this. Why would Abraham go along with this request? How about this? Abraham was loyal to God throughout his life, maybe ignoring the part where he produced another child with Hagar. Anyway, throughout his life, Abraham consistently demonstrated loyalty and obedience to God. He had learned to trust God's promises and directives, even when they seemed difficult or impossible. Remember, we have a God that does the impossible. He can do anything. Atheists listening out there, no, we're not going to go into that whole rock lifting situation. Real quick, God can't do anything that would negate his godliness. Simple as that. Number 2, Abraham had faith that God would provide. Remember the question we're talking about again? Why would Abraham go along with this request? Number 2, Abraham had faith that God would provide. Abraham's faith is evident in what I just read. He told Isaac that God would provide a lamb for the sacrifice in Genesis 22:8. And indeed, God did provide a ram as a substitute for Isaac at the last moment in Genesis 22:13. This experience reinforced the principle of substitutionary sacrifice, foreshadowing Christ's ultimate sacrifice for humanity. How about another reason why Abraham went along with the request? Abraham bouncing books now. Abraham believed that God could raise the dead. That's not in Genesis. So, to that, we have to bounce over to Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 to 19. I'm going to read from the New Living Translation of this one. It goes like this. It was by faith that Abraham offered Isaac as a sacrifice when God was testing him. Abraham, who had received God's promise, was ready to sacrifice his only son Isaac. We're in verse 18 now. Even though God had told him, Isaac is a son through whom your descendants will be counted. Verse 19. Abraham reasoned that if Isaac died, God was able to bring him back to life again. And in a sense, Abraham did receive his son back from the dead. That is again Hebrews chapter 11, verses 17 to 19. I read the New Living Translation version of the Bible. So that New Testament verse could provide insight into Abraham's mindset. Hebrews 11, 17, 19. It explains that Abraham believed God could raise the dead. He could raise Isaac from the dead, if necessary, you know. And that belief underscores Abraham's deep trust in God's power, and again, faithfulness to his trust. Let's wrap this up. Number 4 of why would Abraham go along with that request? We just talked about it. God's promise about Isaac's future. God explicitly promised that Isaac would play a crucial role in fulfilling the covenant. And that is in Genesis 17, chapter 17, verses 15 and 16. Let's read that real quick. NLT again. Sarai is named Sarah. Then God said to Abraham, regarding Sarai, your wife, her name will no longer be Sarai. From now on, her name will be Sarah. And I will bless her and give you a son from her. Yes, I will bless her richly. She will become the mother of many nations. Kings of nations will be among her descendants. Not Ishmael. Ishmael came from Hagar. Isaac came from Sarah. So, Abraham's faith in God's promise gave him the confidence to believe that God would ensure Isaac's survival, even if it required miraculous intervention. I told you that was going to be beefy, didn't I? Yeah, that was some good stuff. Okay, we got 2 more left. I was hoping this would be under 20 minutes for this episode, but it's going to be an hour. Number 5, Isaac and Jacob, Genesis chapters 25-36. The lives of Isaac and Jacob continue to theme God's covenant faithfulness. Isaac's life is marked by God's reaffirmation of the covenant promises made to Abraham. The birth of Esau and Jacob introduced themes of sibling rivalry and God's sovereign choice. As Jacob's younger brother is chosen to carry the covenant line, Jacob's dream of a ladder reaching heaven in Genesis 28 and his wrestling with God in Genesis 32 highlight key moments of divine encounter and transformation. Jacob's name change to Israel also signifies his new identity and role in God's plan. I'm really trying to keep it short, but the wrestling with God in chapter 32 is great. Long story short, first read it, but basically they wrestle all night. Isaac would not let go until God would bless him, or the man that he's wrestling would bless him, I believe, until God basically taps his hip, probably popping out his hip and making him tap out. It's a great story. Okay, lastly, number 6. Story of Joseph in Genesis 37 to 50. Lots of chapters there, but it's going to be short. Joseph's story is a compelling account of God's providence and faithfulness amidst human betrayal and suffering. That's a lot of words, ain't it? My man was sold into slavery by his jealous brothers. Joseph, he rose to power in Egypt through his integrity and God-given ability to interpret dreams. Pharaoh loved that. And also his strategic management during a severe famine saved many lives, including those of his family that he lost. Joseph's ability to forgive his brothers and recognize God's sovereign hand in his life. For that, see Genesis 50, verse 20. It illustrates the power of faith and redemption, and of course forgiveness, like I just said. His story foreshadows Christ's redemptive work, turning evil intentions into opportunities for salvation and blessings. Like I said, I'm wrapping it up. We're at 42 minutes and it's almost 4 o'clock in the morning. So to wrap that up, these accounts in Genesis are they're not just historical records, but they're profound events that reveal God's character, his relationship with humanity, and of course his redemptive plan. They set the stage for everything that's coming in the Bible. It demonstrates God's sovereignty, faithfulness, and unwavering commitment to his creation, to his commitment to us. By going deep into these accounts in Genesis, we gain a richer understanding of our faith and the truths that shape our relationship with God. Let's close this up a bit now. It's getting late. How about we talk real quick about reflections and modern applications that we can use for this modern day, because it's 2024. Think about this. How do these themes resonate with us today? Let's go by 4 of them. Think about these. Creation. We are reminded of the inherent goodness of creation and our responsibility to care for it. Talked about the fallen man. We see the reality of sin and its consequences. But we also see God's plan for redemption. Covenant. Remember, we are part of God's covenant people, called to trust his promises and to live in relationship with him. Talk to him. He already knows what you're thinking, so just say it. Be honest with him. Tell him how he feels. Tell him how you feel. And try to listen. For me, it's always hard to listen. I wish I could hear a voice instead of what I hear. Sometimes you may hear some sort of voice. Trust that it's him. Sometimes he speaks through signs in the world. Or I guess in my case, sometimes he speaks through dreams. Maybe that's another episode of the ways God talks to us. Anyway, last one, Patriarchs. The story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph teach us about faith. It definitely teaches us about obedience and God's faithfulness. Reflect on those 4 things. All right, conclusion. It's time to go. You got things to do. So, in conclusion, Genesis is not just a book not just a book of beginnings. It's a book that lays the groundwork for our understanding of God's relationship with humanity. It is a story of creation, fall, redemption, and covenant. And it's a story that continues to unfold throughout the entire Bible, which we're going to go through all of it. I highly encourage you to read Genesis for yourself. I can't go through an entire book like that. You have to read it for yourself and make notes and just go through it. If you don't have a Bible, I would recommend the New Living Translation version. If you want something that's closer to original language translated, look at the English Standard Version, ESV, or the New King James Version. But get your own Bible, go through it. If you don't have an actual book, go to BibleGateway.com. That's always a good source. So anyway, I encourage you to read Genesis for yourself. Reflect on its message. Next book, you know it. It's going to be Exodus. That might end up being a 2-parter. If you have any questions or thoughts about Genesis, send them to me. But I would also recommend you talk to your own pastor or deacon or minister that you may know at your church. However, if you do want to send some feedback, feel free to email thewordwalkcast@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter @thewordwalk. Also, don't forget to share the podcast with your friends and hit the subscribe button. Feedback's nice. I hope you enjoyed it. Anyway, thank you for joining me on this journey through Genesis. Stay blessed and keep exploring the Word of God.